Welcome to the We Love Our Heart, the podcast, episode 3. And in this episode, we are talking to Dr. Stephen Hussey, a fascinating guy who, despite being fit and healthy, had a widowmaker heart attack in his 30s. But he has since learned what was the probable cause of the heart attack, but more importantly, how he can avoid it in future. He's learned many things, but include in this conversation, we're talking about sunlight, about grounding, infrared light, energy transfer within the body, and most importantly, so stick around to the end for this, how important water, the right water, is for your body and for your health. But without further ado, over to Dr. Stephen Hussey. Welcome, Dr. Stephen Hussey, to We Love Our Heart, the podcast. We've talked before, and I'm fascinated to hear what we're going to be discussing the next half an hour. But first of all, how are you today?
Doing great. Just another beautiful sunny day.
Absolutely. We've been outside in the sun this afternoon as well, getting plenty of sunshine at the moment. Now, I've made a list here of things we're going to try and get through, but we won't get through all of this. But I usually start by asking my guests, earned it or learnt it? Why are we talking today? But I think you've done a bit of both, right? Do you want to tell us a little bit about your backstory?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a long backstory, but I'll try and keep it brief. Yeah, I've just always been interested in health my entire adult life. Always ate well and exercised and everything. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 9. So that kind of forced me into this health world and trying to manage that. And yeah, surprisingly, at age 34, out of the blue, I had a widowmaker heart attack. I look just like I do now, nice, fit, healthy, ate a whole foods diet, exercised regularly, still happened to me. So obviously at that point, I felt like I missed something. So I decided to go figure out what that was and what I missed. And I found out that there was many more aspects to heart disease that is not conventional wisdom. And with that information, I was able to devise a plan for myself to heal my heart. So the only medication I took that they recommended was a blood thinner for 6 months because there was a stent in my heart at this point. But over the next year and a half, 2 years, well, within 3 months, 3 or 4 months, I completely healed my heart as far as my ejection fraction going back to normal. I never developed heart failure, which they told me I would do if I didn't take medications. And then over the next year and a half, 2 years, I completely reversed a 75 to 99% blockage of plaque in my leg. And my coronary arteries are now free of plaque based on CT angiogram I did about a year ago. So again, I was able to do all those things without the approach of the medical system. And even when I did those things, the medical system was kind of denied that I did them. They were like, well, we can't say it's better because we don't see these things get better. And so yeah, along the way, I figured out a lot of different aspects of what actually causes heart disease and kind of trying to explain it within like the human history and where we were and where we are now, because this epidemic of heart disease wasn't always in existence. And now I work with people and I coach them to a deeper understanding of the actual causes of heart disease so that they feel more empowered. Rather than take this medication and hope for the best, it's very much what actually causes heart disease so you can do something about it. You can look into your environment and change it. So yeah, that's what I do.
Fantastic, fantastic. And it's so much aligned with, what we do at We Love Our Heart, because we're all about getting away from this. I mean, I've been there a couple of times, you get this cocktail of drugs given to you when, you've had the heart attack. I'm sorry, you've got the stents, quite a few of those, but never mind. And then, you leave the hospital and they're like, oh, here you go, stick to these medications for the rest of your life and you'll be fine. And I'm like, well, crazy. And by the way, eat a Mediterranean diet. No one tells you what a Mediterranean diet is, by the way, but we can also talk about that later. And I think I mentioned
Yeah.
it in someone before. The first time I can still remember, I went to the chemist or the drugstore in your case, and gave them my prescription, and the woman was like busy on the till, and I was like looking at this big figure ping up on the till, and like, oh wow, your last customer must have spent a fortune. And she looked at me and said, "No, Mr. Felsted, these are yours." I'm like, what? And they were like, well, in dollars, they'd be like $700-800. Okay, I'm privately insured. Fantastic. I can pay, I can send it, I can get the bill back. But I'm thinking, I don't want to be committed to spending $700 a month to effectively stay alive, right? That's what they tell you, isn't it?
Right.
That's what you don't. Oh, you've got to take. If you stop one of these, you'll die. This was the message, and very much like you. I mean, I haven't done the CT angiograms recently, but very much like you, I've weaned myself off over the years, looked at different ways of dealing with it, and I feel today almost as healthy as I was before my heart attacks. But I'm not popping pills every day. We're going to talk about some supplements as we move on. I was just listening to you talking as well about, well, we mentioned sunshine, vitamin D, and even melatonin. We can maybe touch on that. And then I want to get into the body of the subject, which will be some of the things I'm also really interested in is water, red light therapy, and things like this. So
Hmm.
let's kick off. We mentioned just before about sunshine, vitamin D. I do take vitamin D as a supplement. It's one of my regulars, and I'm quite pleased. And again, we can talk about. I heard you don't measure people by their blood results, but I'm, a bit of a geek as well. Also from the sporting side of me, I like to see my power
Hmm.
output, my pulse rate, and and all these metrics. And so I do like to see my blood results, and I do like to compare and say, oh, that's better than it was a year ago and 2 years or whatever. So what I'm saying is, one of the things I'm quite pleased about is the fact that my vitamin D has consecutively gone up over the year, which pleases my traditional doctor, to be fair. So,
Hmm.
what's your take on vitamin D, first of all?
Um, well, I think that there's been a lot of studies that show that sunlight exposure is healthy for cardiovascular disease, and it was just assumed that that benefit comes from vitamin D because kind of people kind of thought, oh, sunlight, that's where you get vitamin D. That's the only reason sunlight's important. And it is one thing that is very important, like that we do make some vitamin D from sunlight as long as we have sulfur and cholesterol as well. We can make that when it hits our skin. However, there's also a lot of studies that show that it's not the vitamin D, because if you take vitamin D supplementation and the benefits of sunlight exposure are negated. So basically, you could take supplemental vitamin D and you're not getting the same benefits you would. Why is that? I would say because there are other aspects of what sunlight does for us that are much more cardiovascular healthy. One is that it creates structured water, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in a little bit. But the sun is always 40 to 50% infrared light anytime that it's up, and that's the best way to build structured water in your body. And that has vast benefits for the cardiovascular system and for prevention of clotting. The second is that near infrared light from the sun is where like that exposure on your skin and getting into your mitochondria is what creates 95% of our melatonin production in the body. The other 5% comes from a pineal gland based off light and darkness signaling through the eye. But so near infrared light, which the sun is also emitting, gives us 95% of our melatonin production. And melatonin, if you just type in melatonin and endothelia or atherosclerosis or whatever into the research, melatonin is one of the most beneficial molecules for the lining of the artery. So if we're getting sunlight exposure, getting that near infrared light exposure, we're making tons more melatonin. And we're also getting bright light exposure so that when we get deep, super steep, we're already getting we're getting more deep restorative healing sleep, which is also important for the arteries as well. So yeah, that's the thing. The other aspect of this is that I don't I don't supplement with vitamin D because I feel that my body is going to, as long as I'm getting enough sunlight, it's going to make the appropriate amounts, right? And if there's not sunlight available, so say like during winter months when there's not as much sunlight or the sun is at a different angle, so you're not getting the UVB penetration through the stratosphere that gives you vitamin D production. There's some very interesting papers, probably 4 or 5 different papers that show that vitamin D and melatonin do the same things in the body, do most of the same things in the body, which makes sense to me because when the sun is out and we get more sun in the summer, we're making that more melatonin from the pineal gland, and we're also and so like what our vitamin D is doesn't really matter that much if we have vitamin D and melatonin kind of balancing, doing the same things, right? But also in the winter, when there's less vitamin D production available, depending on where you are on the planet, melatonin makes up for that. And that is because there's more darkness hours in the winter. So that 5% of melatonin that we make in response to light versus darkness, so in the response to lack of blue light or darkness signaling, we get more of that, or we should get more of that in the winter if we didn't have artificial light. So I don't necessarily like to make my numbers look a certain way. That's not how I kind of interpret health. What I do is I expose myself to nature as much as possible and align myself with the rhythms of nature as much as possible. And I feel my hormones are going to do what they're supposed to do. Now, we also live in a modern world. We don't all live in nature. We all can't do that. So there are times when we can do things to help mitigate some of the deficiencies we have in nature, and supplementation is one of those things. But I try and get it that way. And I also, unless I had like severe low vitamin D symptoms, like fatigue, or like I'm getting sick all the time, or I have like literally poor bone formation, I assume that the amount of vitamin D my body is at is enough for me, because I also know that melatonin is doing a lot of the job that the vitamin D does, and vice versa. So yeah, it's all kind of in balance, and the body's kind of working with itself. But yeah.
Okay, so wow, there's great, and there's like about three or four things I could jump on there and pick up and ask more. Now, one of the two things that I want to mention that you mentioned, very interesting. Let's go, talking about sunlight again. And you also talked about the near infrared that the sunlight contains, and a couple
Mhm.
of things I've have heard or talked about is the most effective time to get sunlight actually for that near infrared is early in the morning and late at night. So as the sun is rising and as the sun is going down, apparently that has more of the near infrared than when it's high in the sky. And the other thing is you mentioned as well right at the beginning there that heart disease is a relatively new thing. 100 years ago, and it wasn't the thing that it is today, the number one killer and so on. And one of and I think you'll agree as well, there was a kind of a spike and an increase in heart disease or general chronic diseases around the 50s and 60s. I think,
Mhm.
we could talk about processed foods and processed oils. But one of the other things that I've heard that spiked it was when we started to switch from filament bulbs to LED lighting, because even filament bulbs also provided a broader spectrum of light, including near infrared. And I think one of the things that has added to chronic disease over the last decade or so is this switch to LED lighting almost ubiquitously in offices and in homes and everything like this. What do you say? I mean, I've also just to add on to that, one of the things that you mentioned there, which is brilliant, and just a grounding. I've even heard people say that one of the things that increased the rate of heart disease was when people started wearing rubber-soled Snickers, and
Mhm.
they were no longer connecting properly to Mother Earth.
Mhm.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the first, just to comment on the first thing, the near infrared, yeah, red and infrared light are, well, they're pretty stable all day long. 40 to 50% of the sun's rays are going to be near or far infrared, infrared and red light pretty much all day long. But in the mornings and in the evenings, it's going to be more pure doses of red and infrared light, because that's what's there. And then when the sun comes up over the horizon, so really like first daylight before the sun rises, actually, that's when you're going to get the most uh, far red and infrared light, more pure forms of it, right? And then when the sun comes up, the green and blue light start to rise, and this stays pretty much the same, but the blue light will peak out at solar noon, which is not always noon, and then it'll start to drop again. But this stays pretty level, and then it all goes away once the sun sets. So yeah, you're getting more pure red and infrared light when you're there, sunrise and sunset. And we see that too, because when the sun comes up, it looks very red, right? That type of thing. And then as it gets up in the sky, it becomes more white light, because white light has all the colors, that kind of thing. So, anyways, there's that aspect of things. And then as far as like heart disease, yeah, in the early 1900s, heart disease was barely a thing as far as as far as the tracking that we have. And so, yeah, it kind of gradually started to increase maybe in the 30s and 40s. And then in the 50s, when we made it a fluorescent light, it really shot up. And so that's because before that we had firelight and incandescent bulbs, and now we have fluorescent bulbs, which are very high in this weird color of green light. And they also have this weird peak of orange. And then in the 70s, we have LED lights that come into the picture, and that's giving off a lot of blue light. So that's disrupting our circadian rhythm, the green and blue light. Mainly blue, but green did it too, which is why the fluorescence had such an issue. And again, if you go into the research and you type in disrupted circadian rhythm and and heart disease or any aspect, any disease really, you're going to see an association with it. This artificial light that's wrecking our circadian rhythm is having a huge impact on our body's ability to heal and detoxify and get deep restorative sleep and that kind of thing. So then, yeah, then it continued to increase, and it probably peaked. Heart disease probably peaked at like the 60s, 70s. And then in the 80s, after the 80s, it kind of dropped a little bit and it leveled out for a while. The death rates of heart disease dropped for a little bit, but now they're on the rise again. The last maybe 5-10 years, their heart disease death rates are on the rise again. And so everybody wants to say, when we see that drop in heart disease deaths, everybody likes to say that was in the 80s. That's when statins started being used. So the statin drugs, they saved everything. And I say, no, no, no. That's not what the research shows. And also the reason that we have that decrease in heart disease deaths is because also in the 80s, we developed a stent and angioplasty procedure that saved people from dying from heart attacks once they're having them. So it wasn't preventing heart disease from happening. It wasn't preventing heart attacks. We just developed a procedure that prevented people from dying once they were having one. And it's been a very effective procedure, it seems, because it did decrease the rates of heart disease. But it was not because of the medications or from lowering cholesterol and things like that. That was not the case.
Let me just say at this point, Stefan, sorry to interrupt, but I do have to thank critical care twice for saving my life and shoving stents into my heart in multiple times. So
sure.
much as I try to steer away from big pharma and medication, nevertheless, my wife also reminds me, without critical care, you wouldn't be here either. So I have to take care of that now. Let's move. Okay, so let's move. No, I'll throw one more thing at you, and then we'll move on to water. I was also watching a thing from William Davis. Although this is something we've looked at also for 5 years ago. When doing We Love Our Heart, we came across a doctor called Dr. Thomas Levy, who was firmly convinced that heart attacks started with dental hygiene. And very recently, William Davis, I'm sure you're familiar with as well, also mentioned that dental hygiene might be a cause of dementia. Because we are carrying these, little bacteria in our mouth, and then small intestine overdoses, small intestine, cider. What is it? Small intestine bacteria overdose in the top of your intestine as well. What's your thoughts on dental hygiene?
Yeah, there's a definite connection to things that can happen in our mouth to systemic health, including heart disease. One of them is mercury fillings or amalgam fillings. The amount of mercury that we put in people's mouths is pretty crazy. And there seems to be a threshold of which your body can handle, depending on the person and other toxins you're exposed to. But yeah, it reaches a certain threshold of mercury because those mercury fillings are off-gassing. Every time you chew, you're getting mercury and you're just kind of swallowing the mercury gas. There's a definite correlation. There's been plenty of studies that show that these heavy metals, including mercury specifically, when you reach a certain threshold of that in your blood, it increases the risk for atherosclerosis. But that's explained by the fact that heavy metals can be quite damaging. These are all things that steal our body's charge, right? So when we think of inflammation or oxidative stress or anything like that, what that means to me is that something is interfering with your body's ability to maintain its charge. And by charge, I mean basically electrical charge. It means electricity. It means electrons. Our bodies are just designed to harvest electrons from our environment and use that energy to create order. And that order we call health. If we start to get disorder because we don't have enough charge, we get disease. It makes it hard for the body to heal itself and stay healthy. And so heavy metals are one of those things that can steal the body's charge. There's plenty of other things to do that, including infectious bacteria, right? When I say infectious bacteria, I mean we are covered in bacteria, throughout our entire digestive tract, and then on our skin, we're covered in bacteria. That bacteria is not supposed to be in the bloodstream. So if it finds access to the bloodstream, that can be a problem. It's called endotoxemia. This bacteria is endotoxic gram-negative bacteria. And if it finds a pathway to the bloodstream, it's a very inflammatory thing. The body sees that bacteria and it attacks it like it's supposed to. It's supposed to kill it. But when it kills it, it releases these endotoxins. These endotoxins are very, very inflammatory, meaning they're very able to steal charge from the body. So that can damage the lining of the artery, it can stress the liver, all these types of things. And these types of, in the dental situation, the way that we get these is if we have gum disease. So if your gums are bleeding, that's a direct pathway from your mouth to the bloodstream, right? Or if we get a tooth pulled and it wasn't cleaned out properly, and the periodontal ligament wasn't scraped out, then it kind of closes up and there's dead tissue in there, and that dead tissue creates infection. And this infection you can't feel because there's no nerve supply there anymore because they pulled the tooth. You can't fight it off because there's no blood supply to it because they pulled the tooth. So that's a situation, but also root canals. Root canals would basically kill a tooth. They kill a
I
tooth and
was
they
about to say
leave.
what you're describing there is a root canal as well.
Yeah,
And
it's either a pulled tooth, an extraction that wasn't cleaned out properly, or a root canal. Root canal, they kill a tooth. If you ask any surgeon anywhere if you would ever leave dead tissue in the body, they say absolutely not. You can't do that. But that's exactly what they do in dentistry with root canals. Now, I've heard some pretty good arguments of these new techniques of being able to do root canals that don't lead to that, or at least delay it for a long time. That like they can be done better, but it's still dead tissue in the body. So I would say eventually it's still going to develop that thing. But there are definitely better ways that it can be done. But yeah, so that's the dental connection. Now, endotoxemia has been linked with arrhythmias, cardiac arrhythmias. It's been linked with heart attacks. It's been linked with atherosclerosis, because again, we're stealing the charge, right? These gram-negative bacteria that release the endotoxins are stealing the body's charge, making it very hard for you to maintain structured water in your arteries, making it very hard for your body to decrease this, have this low body or this higher body charge. So you're not in this low body charge state, because the low body charge state is going to mess with the nervous system. Your body's like, we don't like this. So the nervous system is always on high alert, which can lead to arrhythmias and things like that. So yeah, it's a pretty toxic situation. And we can do things like neutralize that bacteria with cholesterol. Cholesterol will do that, or antibiotics and things like that. I don't necessarily condone that, but you could do that, or you could stop the source. You could fix where the source is, which is in the mouth, like the exposure to it. Yeah.
okay, cool. And yeah, I've going through a process, still am, of having my crowns removed one by one. I've got a couple of holes at the back. We're waiting because, if I look back, probably one of the biggest triggers for my heart disease was poor dental work.
Hmm.
I mean, like I had a lot of crowns, and one thing led to another. But let's get to, you've built a perfect bridge there, and I'm sorry I get so excited about this, but you've built a perfect bridge there to when you were talking about charge in the body. And we know, as in you and I, and a select few probably know, that this is linked to the structured water in our body. And in fact, I was just listening to I'll share it with you later, a very interesting podcast from a guy called Dr. Pierre Corey. I don't know if you heard of him, but he was
Hmm.
talking about water being an electrically coherent water is his
Hmm.
um, choice use of words to describe structured water, which I think is quite interesting, because we know it's about the electric charge of the water, and the body is this. I've seen it described as this kind of a capacitor, whether that's on a mitochondrial level or on a whole level. And that's why we mentioned before about grounding. And it still astonishes me that very few people realize that the earth is negatively charged. And we also have our own charge, and we have to neutralize this by constant contact with nature, as you started off by talking about. But let's just hit a little bit about structured water. You see, I have my devices at the back here to drink structured water. I know some people say, okay, drinking structured water is pointless because it goes through the gut anyway, but I don't care. It also gives me a good enough feeling anyway. But what's your view? Because anyway, to kick that off, I always say water is not all water. Water is not created equal, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and so to preface all this, I'm going to say, we have to think that this is what nature is doing to water, right? So we have to think about how does nature give us water, like from a spring, or things like that. Like that's what we kind of want to mimic. The water coming out of our pipes is pretty dead because it has been removed from that process that nature puts it through for a long time. So yeah, it turns out, we all, learned in school that water has these three different states, this solid, liquid, gas. But there's actually a fourth state that water can exist in, and it's more like a gel. And you can kind of think the consistency of raw egg white, that gel-like sensation. So anyways, under certain conditions, water will form itself into this gel. Those conditions are it needs a biological surface or a water-loving surface, and it also needs energy, and we need the raw material, which is water, H2O. And when those conditions are met, then water will structure itself onto that biological surface, so that hydrophilic surface. And what that means is some of the liquid water will rearrange itself in a way and kind of change its molecular makeup a little bit to form this gel-like layer next to it. And then next to that, there's still liquid water here, but then there's gel-like layer. So any biological surface will form that, including the lining of the arteries. Um, and so, but structured water exists everywhere in the body, right? There's some liquid water, like in lymphatic fluid and in the blood, but also in the cerebral spinal fluid and places like that. But in that liquid fluid, in those spaces where there's liquid fluid, there are also biological surfaces what that fluid is being carried in, and those biological surfaces will form structured water from the water in those fluids. And so, yeah, then what we have to ask ourselves is why would this be? Why would this happen, right? And water is a very unique liquid. And it turns out, I mean, everybody thinks that the energy currency of the body is ATP. And Gilbert Ling disproved that a long time ago. It is not ATP. ATP is an energy forming bond, right? It does hold some energy, but it's not the energy currency of the body. ATP has a very specific purpose. The way the body holds energy is to build structured water. So you mentioned that structured water is very electronegatively charged. It's got this electron component to it. And the reason that it's electronegatively charged is twofold. One is that because of the way structured water forms, one of the hydrogens of the H2O molecule that is water is cleaved off. And the oxygen and hydrogen that are left are teamed up with other oxygens and hydrogens, and they form this like lattice-like structure where it's kind of like these hexagonal honeycomb, or some people think it's pentagonal, but like they line up next to each other and they're all connected. So there's this structure to the water. Rather than water molecules just moving around at random, there's this structure to the water a little bit, which gives it that gel-like nature. But because one of the hydrogens is cleaved off, now we just have an oxygen who's a bigger molecule that's negatively charged, and we don't have the balance of two polar hydrogens, we just have one. So that negativity makes structured water electronegatively charged. And also, now that all the molecules are connected to each other in this lattice-like form, electrons can move through it. So that also gives it a very negative charge, is those electrons moving through it. And so whenever the body is getting an energy source to it, whether it's infrared light or being in touch with the earth where we soak up electrons, or when we harvest the chemical bonds from food and extract the electrons from it, then those electrons are stored in the body via structured water. That's the energy storage form of the body, is structured water. And when we build that structured water, it actually acts like a battery. So we know that it's building up charge, because if you get this electronegatively charged area here where the structured water is, because of the hydrogens that are cleaved off and they're still in the liquid water here, this concentrated and positively charged hydrogens is a positive next to a negative. And that's a battery, right? We know that from a battery because we can look at the positive and negative charge. And they've actually shown in Dr. Pollock's lab at University of Washington, you can plug an electrode into the negative charge and into the positive charge, and you can power a light bulb. So we know this holds energy, and it's the energy storage form for the body. Now, so it also, like, the things that charge structured water are infrared light, being in contact with the earth, but also creating coherence in water by making the water molecules interact with themselves on a more relationship level rather than just kind of isolated here like this. They're moving around each other and they're interacting, and then they go to another one, they interact with this one over here, and they're more coherent. They're kind of talking to each other more. And the way we do that, Dr. Pollock found, is that you vortex the water in the presence of oxygen. And that's exactly what nature is doing to water. Water in nature is very clean, free of toxins if it's coming straight from a spring, out of the earth. It's full of minerals, and it's vortexed, right? It's been energized in some way. And then the water comes out of the spring and it's in contact with the earth. It's under the sunlight. It's moving. That's very important. The water is moving. It's flowing over rocks and rivers, over waterfalls. It's crashing on the beach in waves. It's evaporating and precipitating all over the place. Nature is moving water in the presence of oxygen under sunlight all the time. And that's living water is what that is. Whereas if we pass water through pipes all day long and we just recycle that through pipes and we pump it full of chloride and things to treat the water coming out of your tap is very dead water. It's not going to do the same thing when you drink it, right? So technically, yes, you cannot drink structured water. Because if you tried to, you'd be drinking like a gel, be kind of trying to drink Jello. But you can drink water that is toxin-free, mineral-rich, and energized in some way, that is more likely to get into your body and form structured water once it's in there. And then once you drink water, you can also do things to your body that help get structured water. And so all these links to all these diseases from lack of sunlight or lack of being outside and things like that are all because our body's lacking energy, and it can't maintain order when we're doing that because it can't maintain structured water. And that's the story of structured water.
That is fantastic. I mean, how can I say this? Because we're on the same page, so it's really easy for me to get completely overexcited because I just love hearing this about charge and structured water, and we're running out of time effectively. But we could talk about Victor Schauberger. He
Hmm.
spent hours, or he spent his life looking at streams, and it's all about the little vortexes and the mineralization running over the stones. I was and water is life. I could talk about the link between a water molecule and the golden ratio. Have you come
Hmm.
across this as well? Yeah,
Hmm.
freaky stuff. I have to give a shout out to my friend Ken Wheeler. He does some fabulous stuff as well on that, on the esoteric side of stuff. But I think we should finish on one little thing. I'm going to introduce my little Quelby balls. These are ceramic balls that are treated or really heated up. And they do, as you say, they add some mineralization to the water and give it some kind of energy source as well.
Right.
And the reason I only mentioned this, because one thing I wanted to talk about was just sleep. You also touched on it once as well, that sleep is, what I found as well is that sleep is a healing process. It's not just a resting process. It's the one
Hmm.
time of the day that your body can actually heal itself. And I also, if you look in the background, it's not an accident. I'm sitting in my bedroom because we actually bought the powdered version of these Quelby balls and included it in the paint to create an aura of energy from these balls that have also, and I have to be honest, I've had them now 6 weeks, and thank you, Hans, my friend, sleeping like a baby. So it is also the one of the things that really helps, but it's just because it helps create my body create the structured water. That's, I mean,
Hmm.
massively into that. But again, so what can I say, Stefan? That was an amazing. Well, we've done half an hour now, and it was just like it went like that. I'm so sorry, and we still haven't touched on lots of other things, but great. I mean,
Yeah.
so anyway, so the key takeaway for me was yes, dental hygiene was an issue to begin with. We talked about one of the reasons I potentially had a heart attack was lack of minerals, electrolytes in my blood during
Hmm.
the competition that I was in. And the things that I've learned most, moving on from there, is infrared light, which we've talked a little about, sleep and proper use of water to lead a healthy life. Well, and what's your, I mean, that's more or less the same for you, right? What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I never had any dental stuff for me, but for me, it was severe disruption in circadian rhythm. It was lack of structured water. I was pretty dehydrated at the time of my heart attack, but it was also the stress I was under. The stress that I was kind of chronically under, and then a very stressful thing happened to me. I heard about, bad news about a close family member a day and a half before the heart attack.
Right.
So those factors for me are likely what caused it. The mechanisms are kind of up for debate. I could argue either one. It was either nervous system imbalance signal to the heart, or it was an acute clot. But I had no plaque in my arteries beforehand, based on testing. So yeah, it had to have been one of those two. Yeah, and there's so much nuance there. But yeah, the things that made the difference for me, because my diet and exercise stayed the same from before the heart attack to after, and the 2 years after when I healed everything. Diet and exercise stayed the same. My LDL cholesterol levels stayed the same this entire time. And the things that I changed were I got more sunlight, I got more contact with the earth, set my circadian rhythm, and I did infrared sauna probably 6 times a week. So those were the major things that I changed that had the most impact for me as far as getting this result.
Okay, fantastic. Well, long may you remain healthy. All my best to our mutual friend Colin Littlewood from New Zealand as well.
Mm-hmm. Of
He's a great guy. Stefan, thank you so much for that. Fantastic.
course, anytime.
Wasn't that something of a journey? We have learnt so much there, and thank you so much. But I do have to confess something and make an apology. For some reason, I kept calling him Stefan. It's Dr. Stephen Hussey. And my apologies, Stephen. It was because earlier in the day I was talking to my German friend who is called Stefan, and that's how the confusion is. But if you want to learn more about Dr. Stephen Hussey and how to get in touch with him, be part of his coaching program, I shall put the links in the notes below. Obviously, do the thing, like and subscribe to this video if you want to know more about me and what we are trying to do with We Love Our Heart. Well, it's very simple. www.weloveourheart.com or mark@weloveourheart.com email. Fantastic. Then, till the next time, cheerio.